If a CEO went undercover as a customer and discovered his employees were being exploited, what would he do? Stay silent and look the other way, or change everything in just one night? The soft yellow light of the desk lamp cast a warm glow over Ethan Rowe's contemplative face, deepening the already sharp lines of the 38-year-old CEO. In the quiet room, the only sound was the steady ticking of the clock, while stacks of customer reports lay spread out before him like a silent indictment. Simple words, yet they weighed heavily on the pride of a man who had spent his youth building Firestone Pizza, once regarded as the standard of service and quality. "Pizza arrived cold after almost an hour late," Ethan muttered, reading the complaint aloud, his eyes flashing with anger mixed with disappointment. The delivery guy looked like he was about to collapse, didn't even greet the customer. Each sentence felt like a needle piercing the trust and pride he had once held so firmly. His hand unconsciously tightened around his pen, his knuckles turning white from the strain. Ethan had always believed that if you were honest, maintained quality, and respected customers, the system would sustain itself. But now revenue had stagnated, customer retention rates were plummeting, and negative feedback was spreading like a wildfire across branches. Worse still were the repetitive reassurances from Travis Cole, the regional manager overseeing most East Coast locations. "Everything's fine, we just need to hire more staff," Travis had said during last week's meeting, his tone calm and overly confident. But the numbers and field reports screamed a very different truth. Ethan was not the kind of man to be fooled by excuses. He had suspected something was wrong for a while, but he hadn't had clear enough evidence to confront it. Tonight, however, a viral video shattered his last illusions. The shaky phone footage showed a young delivery boy being harshly scolded by a customer for being nearly an hour late. The boy only lowered his head, saying nothing in his defense, his face slick with sweat, his wrinkled uniform looking as if he had just run through a storm. What struck Ethan was not the angry words, but the boy's eyes, exhausted, resigned, and completely devoid of resistance, as if he had grown used to being treated that way. Ethan turned off the video, leaning back in his chair, his deep gaze fixed on the darkness of the room. He knew exactly what that meant. The problem wasn't with the customers. It was rooted in his own operations and management. It was time to step out from behind the safety of numbers, to leave the high seat of a CEO and search for the truth himself. And this time, Ethan knew he wouldn't just be observing, he would intervene, no matter the cost. The night draped itself over the city like a heavy curtain weighing down Ethan Rowe's thoughts. In the bathroom, he stood motionless before the mirror, staring at his own reflection on the fogged glass. The CEO with neatly trimmed hair, a perfectly tailored suit, and the sharp, commanding eyes he wore in boardroom meetings, that image no longer suited what he was about to do. Ethan took a deep breath, raised his hand to his carefully groomed hair, and decisively cut away several strands, leaving behind uneven tufts that gave him a deliberately disheveled look. He let his beard grow in patchy stubble, something he had always despised for making him appear unkempt, but tonight it was the perfect disguise. On the table lay a faded old hoodie, a pair of worn-out jeans with frayed knees, and scuffed, brandless sneakers. Ethan ran his fingers over the wrinkled fabric, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly. It was the kind of outfit worn by someone working late-night shifts. But the most important pieces were a cheap pair of reading glasses hastily bought at a small pharmacy and a dark brown wig with soft curls. Together, they transformed Ethan into an average, slightly unkempt man, weary from life. He tried them on, tilting his head in the mirror, and let out a self-mocking smile. Even he had to admit he looked nothing like a powerful CEO anymore. As he zipped up the hoodie, Ethan recalled the skeptical glance from the store clerk when he bought the cheap wig earlier that day. "Looks like you're about to dress up to prank someone," the kid had joked half-seriously. Ethan had only smiled, but a chill had run through him. If that boy had been more curious, if someone had taken a photo of him dressed like this, his entire plan could collapse before it even began. The phone on the table buzzed softly. A notification flashed confirming an order. Ethan glanced at the screen. A cheese pizza with extra toppings from branch number 22, the location with the highest number of complaints in the system. It was also under the supervision of Travis Cole, the man who repeatedly claimed, "Everything is fine." Ethan's lips curled slightly, his gaze cold but resolute. It was time to see just how fine things really were. Sitting down in the old chair in the living room, Ethan pulled the hood over his head, quietly watching the clock. 30 minutes, the standard time for a pizza to arrive. But Ethan wasn't just waiting for food. He was waiting for the unfiltered truth to appear before his eyes, ready to reveal itself through the smallest details. And if that truth turned out to be what he expected, he would no longer be the CEO sitting safely behind a desk. He would be the man who would stop at nothing to punish anyone destroying what he had spent his entire life building. A soft knock sounded at the door, exactly at the 58th minute. Ethan glanced at the wall clock, his eyes turning slightly colder. Nearly an hour for a pizza order, when his system clearly stated 30 minutes as the maximum. He took a deep breath, stood up, and gently pulled the door open. Standing before him was a young man, slightly thin, his hair damp and sticking to his forehead, his wrinkled uniform looking as though it had endured an endless day without rest. The name tag on his chest read, Liam Torres. "I'm sorry, sir, I'm late," Liam said, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. He bowed his head slightly, holding the pizza box out, forcing a polite smile despite his fatigue. Ethan took the box, feeling immediately that the bottom had cooled, but instead of reacting, he carefully studied Liam. There were dark circles under the young man's eyes, and every small movement betrayed his struggle. The trembling hand as he handed over the receipt, the rapid breaths, and the rise and fall of his chest as if he had just run a marathon against time. Ethan hadn't planned to talk, but something in Liam's eyes made him change his mind. "Busy night, huh?" His tone was casual, almost like polite conversation. Liam hesitated, then nodded, exhaling softly. "Yes, it's been crazy. Actually, I'm the only one doing deliveries tonight. There should have been 3 of us, but one quit and the other called in sick." Ethan narrowed his eyes slightly. "So you're covering the whole area by yourself?" Liam nodded again, trying to give a reassuring smile. "I need the hours. The more shifts, the better." Ethan leaned casually against the door frame, though every word was calculated. "At least they're paying you overtime, right?" The question seemed to freeze Liam for a brief moment. His smile faded, and his gaze flickered before dropping to his worn-out shoes. "Technically, yes, but..." His voice lowered, glancing around nervously as if afraid someone might overhear. "The manager cuts my hours on other days, so my total doesn't exceed full time. He says it's company policy." Ethan felt as if he had been punched in the chest. Company policy? That was a blatant lie. He knew every policy he had written, and none allowed manipulating schedules to avoid paying overtime. His grip on the pizza box tightened, the lid creaking under the pressure. But Ethan didn't let his anger surface. Not yet. He stared at Liam, his voice deep and steady. "What's your name?" "Liam Torres." His voice trembled slightly, unsure why this customer was asking. Ethan nodded slowly, emphasizing every word, his eyes filled with quiet resolve. "I'll remember your name, Liam." The words carried more weight than any polite thank you could. Liam bowed slightly again before walking back toward an old motorbike parked at the curb. Ethan stood still, watching him leave, and his gaze was no longer that of a customer. It was the gaze of a man about to start a battle, and his first target would be the one who dared to turn his policies into a filthy tool to exploit people like Liam. The next morning, pale sunlight slid across the dusty glass windows of branch number 22, casting an unusually gloomy shadow over the entire building. Ethan Rowe stepped out of his car, no longer in disguise. He wore a simple light blue shirt, dark jeans, and his familiar leather shoes. Though he wasn't dressed in his usual sharp business suit, the confidence and unwavering presence of a man used to making million-dollar decisions every day radiated from every step he took. He pushed the door open, the small bell chiming sharply, yet no one seemed to notice. The counter was empty for a brief moment before a young woman with a lifeless expression emerged from the back. She gave a slight nod, no smile, no greeting as company policy required. Ethan immediately recognized that this wasn't laziness. but the fatigue of someone who had spent too long in an environment stripped of respect and motivation. He chose a table near the kitchen door, where every sound from inside carried clearly. Within minutes of sitting down, a harsh, grating voice erupted from behind the thin kitchen door, loud enough for everyone in the restaurant to hear. "Throw that dough away! How many times do I have to say this before you get it right?" The sound of something likely a dough tray slammed hard against the floor, followed by hurried footsteps. Ethan tilted his head slightly, his gaze growing colder. That voice could only belong to Travis Cole, the same man who fed him those monotonous reassurances every week. The kitchen door creaked open, and as expected, Liam Torres stepped out. His uniform was still wrinkled, his shoes dusted with flour, and sweat dotted his forehead despite the early hour. He walked slowly, head down, placing a pizza tray on the counter, but before he could leave, Travis's voice barked again, louder and sharper this time. "You're late, Liam. I told you to be here at 8, not 8:30. Liam froze, his hands trembling slightly, his weak voice trying to defend himself. "You're mistaken. Yesterday you told me to start at 10. Travis stormed out of the kitchen, his broad frame and flushed face radiating anger. He moved closer to Liam, lowering his voice, but loud enough for everyone to hear. "Oh, so now I'm a liar? You're saying I got it wrong, is that it?" The entire place fell silent. The young woman at the counter instantly dropped her gaze, and the other employees pretended to be busy, too afraid to look up. Ethan remained seated, his eyes locked on Travis, studying his every move. Liam said nothing, standing motionless like a soldier awaiting punishment, his eyes fixed on the floor, his face filled with quiet endurance. Watching the scene, the muscles in Ethan's face tightened. The words, "Everything is fine," that Travis had reported to him felt like knives twisting into the pride of the man who had built this business. Ethan slowly set his coffee cup down on the table, his gaze shifting from Liam to Travis, the last bit of patience within him gone. If not now, then when? He stood, walking toward the counter, his steps deliberate and unhurried, yet each one landed with a weight that echoed through the suffocating silence of the entire store. The atmosphere in the store seemed to freeze as Ethan Rowe walked steadily toward the counter. Every sound felt out of place, the faint crackle of the oven, the dull thud of a dough cutter against the table, all swallowed by a suffocating silence. Travis Cole turned around, his face showing a flicker of irritation at being interrupted during his moment of authority. "What do you need?" Travis asked, his tone still arrogant, clearly convinced this was just another customer complaining about a pizza. Ethan didn't answer right away. His gaze, cold as ice, lingered on Travis's face longer than necessary. Then, slowly, he removed the baseball cap from his head, took off the fake glasses, and looked directly at Travis with the piercing eyes that anyone who had ever worked at Firestone Pizza had seen in company bulletins. For a split second, Travis froze, his eyes widening, the color draining from his face. "Mr. Rowe?" His voice cracked, laced with panic. Ethan tilted his head slightly, his voice low but loud enough for everyone to hear. "You recognize me? Good. Then maybe you can explain to me why one of my employees is being humiliated publicly in front of customers." Travis opened his mouth, stumbling over his words. I was just trying to maintain discipline. He made mistakes." But Ethan raised a hand to cut him off, his stare as sharp as a blade. "Mistakes? Mistakes for working himself to exhaustion all night to keep a store running because of your poor management? Or mistakes for not bowing his head and accepting your lies?" Ethan stepped closer, his voice calm but carrying a weight that made the entire room hold its breath. "Are you telling me this is how you maintain company standards? Are you telling me cutting work hours to avoid paying overtime is my policy?" Travis dropped his gaze, his hands tightening together, his voice shrinking. No, I was just..." Ethan didn't let him finish. "Silence!" The single word cut through the air like a hammer striking steel, cold and final. The other employees flinched, their eyes instinctively turning toward Ethan. For the first time in months, they were seeing someone truly standing up for them. Ethan glanced at Liam, the young man still standing there, his wide eyes filled with disbelief at what was happening. Lowering his tone but making each word firm and unshakable, Ethan said, "Office, now. We will talk there." Travis didn't dare protest. His head bowed as he walked away, his once intimidating presence suddenly looking small and fragile compared to just minutes ago. Ethan watched him leave, then slowly turned to the remaining staff, his voice steady but resolute. "This ends today. From this moment on, no one here will tolerate this kind of nonsense ever again." A quiet stir spread through the store, like a spark of hope being lit. Ethan turned and followed Travis into the office, but the look in his eyes was no longer just anger. It was a determination carved in stone. Never again would anyone at Firestone Pizza be treated like Liam. The office door closed, leaving only two men inside, one who had believed he held absolute power in this store, and the other who had built the entire pizza empire. The harsh fluorescent light above cast down on Travis Cole's face, highlighting the beads of sweat forming on his forehead. Ethan Rowe leaned casually against the edge of the table, arms crossed, his gaze fixed and unyielding. The silence stretched for only a few seconds, but it felt as heavy as hours, pressing Travis until he was the one forced to break it. "Mr. Rowe, I truly didn't know you would be here today. If I had known, I would..." "You would have put on a perfect show to hide the trash you've been running here, wouldn't you?" Ethan cut in, his voice low and steady but sharp enough to slice through the room. Travis froze, swallowing hard, trying to keep his composure. I only want the store to run properly. You know how it is. Employees are lazy, they lack discipline, and if I'm not strict..." Ethan slammed a stack of reports onto the table, the dry slap of paper hitting wood making Travis flinch. "Run properly? These are the customer reports for the last 3 months. Read them. Cold pizzas, late deliveries, employees so exhausted customers pity them, and all of this disaster traces back to branch management. Did you think I wouldn't see this?" Travis glanced down, his face paling, but Ethan didn't give him a chance to speak. Leaning forward, one hand pressed firmly on the table, his stare bored straight into Travis like a drill. "I set a clear policy. All employees working overtime are to be paid in full. No cutting hours to dodge overtime pay. So why is Liam, a kid barely in his 20s, working alone all night, running across this entire district only to have his hours cut on other days just to save your budget?" That was only a temporary solution," Travis stammered, his voice shaking. "You have to understand, with staff shortages, I had to balance." Ethan let out a cold laugh, devoid of humor. "Balance? Balance by pushing employees to the brink of exhaustion, then using company policy as your excuse? You dared to use my name as a shield to lie to them?" Travis stayed silent, his head bowed, his fists clenched tightly at his sides, but too afraid to look up. Ethan inhaled slowly, releasing each word with chilling precision, his voice no longer angry but cold enough to send a shiver through the air. "You're fired, Travis. Effective immediately. Pack your things and leave before I call the audit department to dig deeper into how exactly you've been balancing this store's finances." Travis opened his mouth as if to protest, but one look at Ethan's unwavering eyes, resolute to the point of crushing any argument, silenced him. He exhaled sharply, his shoulders slumping, and gave a quiet nod. As he walked out, his once imposing frame now hunched, stripped of the arrogance he had worn so confidently moments earlier. Ethan stood still for a long moment, his hand resting on the edge of the table as he let his anger settle. But inside, another fire had ignited, the fire of determination to bring change. Because this wasn't just about firing one incompetent man. It was a warning to everyone who dared to stain the name of Firestone Pizza. The office door swung open, and Travis Cole stepped out, his face pale, his eyes vacant. He didn't dare look at anyone, keeping his head down as he quickly gathered a few things from his locker before rushing out. The entire store was silent, every gaze following him, yet no one spoke a word. Deep down, they all understood that Travis's era of management had ended. As his figure disappeared through the door, Ethan Rowe emerged, standing tall, his calm expression radiating an unmistakable authority. He stopped in the middle of the floor, his eyes moving slowly from one person to the next. The young faces lowered their heads as if still too shocked to believe what had just happened. Liam Torres stood near the counter, his uniform still stained, his eyes tense yet glimmering with a faint, fragile hope. Ethan took a deep breath, his voice ringing clear, each word etched into the heavy silence. Starting today, this store will operate under the same principles on which I built Firestone Pizza from the very beginning: respect for employees and serving customers with genuine care. And anyone who cannot accept that can leave right now. No one moved. Ethan continued, his tone low but filled with unwavering conviction. There will be no more cutting hours to avoid paying overtime. Anyone who works extra hours will be paid every single cent they are owed. There will be no more employees pushed to exhaustion because of staff shortages. I will have more staff assigned here within the week. And most importantly, none of you will ever be treated like nameless numbers. You are the soul of this brand. And I, Ethan Rowe, will personally make sure of that. A few heads began to lift, doubt slowly replaced by quiet astonishment. The young cashier, who had kept her head down all morning, bit her lip, her eyes shimmering faintly. Liam remained still, but his shoulders eased, his clenched hands loosening slightly. Ethan walked slowly around the floor, letting his gaze rest on each person, his voice softer now, but firm with determination. I am not here to give a speech and then walk away. I will stay. Today, I will work with you, serve customers alongside you, to see for myself what you go through every day. He stopped at the counter, looking directly at Liam, giving a slight nod. From this moment on, things will be different. A quiet stir rippled through the store. Liam lowered his head briefly, his eyes reflecting something small yet undeniable. Something Ethan recognized instantly: a spark of trust had just been lit. And in that moment, Ethan knew he had planted the very first seed of change. That afternoon, the store was busier than it had been in weeks. Ethan Rowe wore an apron, sleeves rolled up, standing in the kitchen like a trainee. His sharp eyes remained focused, yet his movements were humble, revealing nothing of the man who once sat at the helm of a multi-million-dollar empire. He learned to knead dough, spread cheese, and fold pizza boxes, each action careful and deliberate, as if it were his very first time. And in a way, it was the first time in years he had truly touched the work that had built his name. Liam Torres stood beside him, instructing patiently, his movements quick and practiced, his eyes no longer tense as they had been that morning. You need to stretch the dough thinner or the crust will turn out too thick, Liam said, his voice more relaxed now. Ethan smiled, trying again. The pizza came out slightly uneven, but Liam gave him a small nod of approval. Not bad. A young employee nearby let out a quiet laugh, and for the first time in weeks, it wasn't a laugh stifled by fear. When the delivery shift began, Ethan volunteered to ride along with Liam. They sat together on the old motorbike, the wheels rattling softly every time they hit a pothole. Ethan stayed mostly silent, watching the way Liam bowed politely to customers, how he managed to smile despite the tiredness etched around his eyes. At the first stop, a young mother holding a baby in a blanket smiled as she took the pizza. Thank you, have a great day, she said, handing Liam a few small coins as a tip. Liam only bowed slightly, returning her smile, so genuine that the woman couldn't help but smile back. The second stop was at a small, worn-down house at the corner of a street. An elderly man took a long time searching through a plastic jar before handing over a handful of coins. I'm sorry, this is all I have, he said, his voice trembling slightly. Liam took the money with a warm smile. That's enough, sir. Enjoy your meal. As they turned to leave, Ethan glanced back and caught the old man's grateful look. In that moment, Ethan realized something no revenue chart could ever show: the true value of Firestone Pizza wasn't in massive numbers, but in simple moments like this, where his employees still tried to hold on to kindness despite the weight of pressure. Back at the store, Ethan kept working non-stop. He folded boxes, wiped tables, even carried out a large trash bin to the back kitchen. The employees who had been wary at first began to talk to him more. Smiles slowly returned to their young faces, and even Liam started telling a few light-hearted stories during the shift. Ethan leaned against the counter during a short break, observing quietly, his heart sinking into a deeper, firmer resolve. This was how it had to be to listen, to stand with them, to bring Firestone back to where it truly belonged. The next morning, store number 22 was unusually quiet. The sun had just begun to rise, its first rays slipping through the dusty glass windows, reflecting off tables polished clean the night before, something rarely seen under Travis Cole's management. Ethan Rowe walked in, no apron or hood this time, but still dressed simply in a rolled-up shirt and neatly pressed jeans. He headed straight to the counter where Liam Torres was checking the delivery list. The young man looked less tense than before, but his eyes still carried the caution of someone too used to disappointment. Ethan stopped directly in front of him, his voice steady and direct, wasting no time. "Liam, I have an offer. I want you to be this store's new manager." The air seemed to shift for a moment. Liam's head snapped up, his eyes widening in shock. "Me? But I'm just a delivery guy. I've never managed anything before." Ethan looked him straight in the eye, his serious gaze leaving no room for doubt. "I watched you all day yesterday. You worked without complaint, you treated customers with respect, and you treated your coworkers like real people. That is exactly what Firestone Pizza needs. We don't need liars keeping up revenue numbers. We need people like you." Liam bit his lip, his eyes wavering. There was a new spark there, but it was still buried under layers of doubt. His voice lowered, trembling slightly but firm. "If I say yes, will things really change? Are you sure you won't just disappear after a few days and let everything go back to how it was?" The question struck Ethan like a blade to the chest, because he knew Liam wasn't asking just for himself, but for everyone who had lost faith. Ethan tilted his head slightly, speaking slowly, his voice firm and unwavering. "I promise. And this isn't a promise to hang on a wall. You will have a direct line to me. Anytime there's a problem, you call me. I will come." Liam was silent for a long moment, his eyes searching Ethan's face as if trying to see through the words. Then slowly, he nodded. It was a small nod, but it carried weight, like a fragile thread being tied back together. Ethan extended his hand, and after a brief hesitation, Liam gripped it firmly. That handshake was more than agreement. It was a pact, a new beginning for them both. Ethan allowed himself a small smile, the first in days that carried genuine hope. "We're going to change everything, starting today." And for the first time, in Liam's eyes, there was not just exhaustion, but a faint, shining spark of hope. Just a few weeks after that conversation, store number 22 looked like an entirely different place. The once gloomy and tense atmosphere was now filled with lively laughter and cheerful voices. Employees who used to keep their heads down, avoiding eye contact, now greeted each other warmly every morning. Customers had begun returning more frequently, leaving positive reviews online, something that once seemed impossible. Every small detail had changed, from spotless tables to on-time deliveries, all signs of a powerful transformation. Liam Torres now wore a crisp new manager's shirt. He no longer carried the timid posture of before, and his eyes had changed not with arrogance, but with a sense of responsible confidence. Ethan Rowe sat quietly at a corner table near the window, observing. He no longer needed to give instructions or oversee every task because the employees themselves had begun creating their own order and pride. One afternoon, as the store grew quieter, Liam approached, holding a neatly wrapped pizza box. "You ordered something?" Ethan asked, a hint of surprise in his voice. Liam shook his head with a rare, genuine smile. "No, this is from everyone. We all pitched in to buy it for you." Ethan raised an eyebrow, but Liam had already placed the box on the table. A white piece of paper was taped to the lid, the words written in bold black marker, the uneven handwriting suggesting many hands had contributed. "Thank you for truly listening." Ethan sat still for a long moment, staring at those words. It wasn't the pizza inside that moved him, but the people who had written that message together. In that moment, every revenue chart, every expansion plan suddenly felt small. He nodded slightly, whispering to himself, "I will keep my promise, and I will never let this place become what I once despised." When Ethan looked up, he saw Liam returning to the counter, patiently showing a new employee how to spread cheese around the crust. Soft laughter floated from the kitchen, and a few customers smiled as they received their steaming hot pizzas. The scene was simple, yet so beautiful that Ethan couldn't help but smile. He stood, walking out of the store, leaving behind the golden glow of the late afternoon sunlight reflecting off the glass, framing the faces of young people trying their best every single day. Firestone Pizza had finally returned to its true essence, not just a brand, but a family. And Ethan knew this was only the beginning of a long journey ahead. From the perspective of someone who built an entire empire, Ethan Rowe proved one crucial truth. A brand cannot survive in the long run if it forgets the people who keep it standing every single day. Sometimes, real change doesn't start with grand strategies, but with the courage to listen to one tired employee. If you also believe that respecting employees is the best way to build the future, hit like and subscribe to help spread inspiring stories like this one. And don't forget to leave a comment with the 3 words "listen first," because that is the very first step toward any real change.